Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next edition of In Conversations with. I'm Craig Carolyn from Intrinsic Education, and we are once again really blessed to have another expert in the field of positive education coming to talk to us today, someone who's been involved in POSED from its infancy in South Africa and is really making a big difference in moving it forward. Alan Thompson, the headmaster of St Andrew's College in Grahamstown. Alan, wonderful to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, I know we've had many conversations about POSED, and it's been wonderful to be down at your school. So ladies and gentlemen, I know Alan from quite a while back, actually. We were fellow heads at previous schools, and we often had conversations, mostly standing on around the side of sports fields, before he moved down to take over the headship at St Andrews, and since then has obviously has launched the POSED conference. And Alan, I'm right in saying that you've had two now, is that right?
That's right. In fact, we were all lined up for our third one, which will be a virtual one this year, but we're still planning to pull that together.
Wonderful, and no doubt we'll chat a little bit about that, because I think there are going to be quite a few people who are interested in positive education who will be listening to this podcast, and maybe we'll share a little bit about what that might look like and tell them where to keep their eyes open to see what's happening. So, Alan, I think, what we do on this kind of podcast is we chat a little bit about POSED, how it's influenced your life, how it's influenced your role as a leader, and then also to kind of go back into the history and say, let's go back to the beginning. Where did you first come across positive education, and how has it shaped what you do?
Well, I think it's important to just be clear that positive education isn't a new construct that's just emerged. It really is the pulling together of a whole lot of strands that have existed for a very long time. And so I probably first, I was a cricket coach at St John's back in the olden days, and it didn't take me long to figure out what makes a cricket team flourish, in terms of developing certain sets of skills and thinking within the boys. And I was informed there by a book called Positive Coaching by Jim Thompson, which stepped away from a results-driven environment to first sort of working with the headspace of the boys and giving them the right sort of sense of accomplishment and achievement from every little game, whether you won the game or not, and focusing on process, and eventually through that sort of positive mindset in the team, the results begin taking care of themselves. And so I really enjoyed that, and that drew me to the writings of Tony Humphries. Anybody who knows me knows that I will wax on about Tony Humphries, because Tony Humphries was really talking positive psychology from a slightly different angle to the way it's articulated at the moment, but certainly in terms of being a positive educator, and at the very basic level, first coming to terms with one's own sort of light and the shadows that one casts, and first being at one with self before one is able to be at one with or lead or develop self in others. And so I think those two writers really had a profound effect on me as a young teacher. And as you begin honing those skills, you begin seeing a sort of a pattern of what is successful, and developing your own sort of practice accordingly. So I had opportunity I was organizing conferences. We had Tony Humphries out a number of times, and I came into contact with Nick Bayliss, who at the time was working with Anthony Selden at Wellington. And the work at Wellington took it to a new sort of level, where instead of building practice sort of intuitively and developing a positive mindset through action, there it was quite a set curriculum, and the notion of wellness as not just something that one practices and develops in self, but something that one studies and comes to terms with, notions of flourishing and positive emotion and that sort of thing. So, of course, Anthony Selden has been a huge influence, and I've had the opportunity to interact with him a number of times through other associations that we're part of. So Anthony Selden has been part of the G30 group of heads, and so through there, it gave me opportunity to meet some of the leading figures in global POSED. Simon Murray, who had a lot of experience from his Australian context, which then, of course, led me to Martin Seligman himself, and being part of a global coming together at Pennsylvania to look at the state of POSED in the world, to compare notes as to what we were all doing, and set up a sort of a forum and hear from the experts. We had Lee Waters there, who has again been a really strong influence in our thinking. And so it really has just grown, and you can stop me if I'm rambling on. But
loving this. Keep going, Alan, please.
And so what became obvious is that this is a field that is so good. There's nobody who does badly from this. When a child is flourishing, they do better. When a school is flourishing, it does better. And when schools are sharing with each other best practice in terms of creating a flourishing environment, the entire sector grows. And so our conferences that we've held were first trying to draw together like-minded schools, but it's also trying to develop a sort of a practice of positive education in South Africa, and to then formalize that collective so we could interact on a formal global level with the established POSED bodies that exist.
Wonderful. Alan, it's funny, there's so many names there that I've also kind of crossed paths with. As a matter of fact, Anthony Selden, who, for those folk who are listening to this and don't know the figures or the individuals in positive education, and as you say, it's this broad thing, and there are many strands that obviously fit under the umbrella of POSED, and of course that came from positive psychology, and of course one could argue that, and of course it is the case, positive education has happened before it became a formalized thing. But Anthony Selden, as a matter of fact, Anthony and I, we didn't teach at the same school at the same time, but we taught at the same school. He used to be a master at Whitgift, where I was lucky enough to be head of learning development for a while. And actually, when I was there, he was first at Brighton and then went to Wellington, where he was obviously the head. And there were a lot of things that when I was head of learning development at Whitgift, I was kind of watching and seeing what they were doing, and taking bits and pieces of some really good stuff that he was doing. And I know he attended a couple of conferences that I hosted, De Bono thinking skills things. And of course, Nick Bayliss had actually came and did some work for us at Whitgift as well. So I know him and the work that he does, and it's absolutely fantastic. So, very interesting to hear how those individual people who have you've been in contact with and formed your kind of thought process are very similar, people to who I've met, or the same people I've met, and also have kind of formed my thinking around this. So it's really, really wonderful. And, Alan, what I love, and I think, I'd like to chat a little bit more about, is you talk about the idea of like-minded schools and how we should be looking at getting these schools together to flourish. Tell us, to share how they are flourishing. Tell us a little bit about the program that you guys are running at St. Andrews, because I think it's quite interesting for educators, teachers who are listening, who might think, this is something I'd love to adopt at my school. What are the kinds of things that they could do? And I know there are, as you said, there are quite a few strands. But what is it that you guys are doing at St. Andrews? Tell us a little bit about your program there that people could learn from.
So what became apparent quite early on is that you need a dedicated champion to lead the process. There's lots of resources, and the ability to bring in expertise to grow the thinking is important, but having somebody on the ground who, in our case, is our head of wellness, Craig Kyler, but in different schools give it a different terminology, but you need somebody whose job it is to embed positive psychology into the thinking. And on a number of levels. So as part of the pastoral care team, looking at the sort of below the radar sort of interventions where people are doing positive psychology without knowing it or calling it thus. And that comes down to sports teams and coaching styles and all the hidden sort of curriculum, the discourse of the school, really. So that's important. You need somebody who's going to develop staff, bearing in mind that right back to Tony Humphrey's sort of thinking, you're not going to get a staff member able to lift a child to a psychological state that they're not at themselves yet. So you have to work with staff so that they know the content, but also that they have a sense of wellness and flourishing themselves. If you don't have a flourishing staff, you're not going to have flourishing boys. So there's the element of staff wellness. There's the element of a formalized, if you're teaching a child about gratitude and formally giving them activities around gratitude, you are developing within them in a formal way something, but in a deeply experiential way too. You're teaching, you're helping them to flourish, or you're guiding them to a point of flourishing. So it's a multi-layered thing that's going on all the time. It's not a program. It's not like we've walked in and said, right, we're doing outcomes-based education, now let's have a workshop and get it done. It's like a little trickling river that weaves its sound through the entire place. And I think the best way is it just sort of slowly. You can't say, next week we're going to be flourishing. You just gently change the discourse of the school so that when you look back over a few years, you think, wow, we've really managed a shift. And in well-established schools that are cast in this sort of, I think the bulk of South African schools, even if they think of themselves as progressive, they really are a colonial stamp that, they need to take all that positive sort of heritage. You don't want to throw that out, but you do need to alter the discourse over time and not just be this colonial relic, hoping that everything's going to stay as it always was.
Alan, what I love about what you're saying there is that actually, although the program itself is not formal, there is no program. It's and I love that metaphor about it being a river that just trickles through everything. The thing that is formal is you as the leader of the school, as the person who's driving this, being quite formal in saying this is what we want. This is where we're trying to get. And then ensuring that there is a kind of understanding within the staff that, this is what we're trying to achieve by the way that we operate and sort of almost the language and the behaviors that underpin what it is you're trying to achieve. So there's a kind of explicitness on what it is you're trying to achieve, but then not a formality around the programs. Am I right? Is that kind of on the right path?
Yeah, certainly. So I wouldn't want to suggest that it's vague or just organic forming. It's not like that at all. It's very intentional. And even some aspects of it are formal. So, when you're talking to student affairs portfolio leaders who are students in the senior grades, there you're talking formally about what you're doing. When you're talking to teachers, you're talking formally about what it is that we are working towards. It's not airy-fairy, come up from grassroots sort of stuff. It is led, but it's institutional discourse, and you can't force that. It has to grow like a flower. Sorry, not metaphor.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's kind of the magic of metaphor. Absolutely powerful. Alan, I think that, that's one of the things. I mean, often folk, when you talk about positive psychology, there's sometimes kind of an association people have with kind of popular psychology and and being a little bit sort of, whereas actually the thing that we're talking about, positive psychology and positive education, is actually quite grounded in very it is grounded in very rigorous science, isn't it?
Very much so. So I think anybody who would want to dismiss this as some sort of fad or a pop psychology thing, really, my challenge would be just simply read the literature and make an informed. There's lots of literature, and if you look at the work of Martin Seligman, he's not looking for what people think. He's looking for an evidence-based approach, and the literature that has flowed around this, Lee Waters, Martin Seligman, there's a lot of formal literature that's gone into this.
Absolutely, and I think that therein lies the real strength of it, is that there's the academic scientific basis to this, but with some very practical, very kind of the applied psychology of it, the applied education. There's so much of it now, and I think as a field, although it's relatively new if you talk about psychology and educational kind of movements, although it's relatively new, it's not brand new. There is now a real weight behind, weight of proof behind the success of this, which is really wonderful.
Yeah.
Alan, I just want to touch on something, because I want to draw us back to this, because I think now more than ever, this is critical. I love the fact that Craig's title at school is head of wellness. Kind of, do you want to tell me a little bit about, kind of your thoughts on wellness for teachers? I think at this time, and I'm going to ask you to be, maybe, I know it's important always, but probably now more than ever, isn't it?
Very much so. And I think, we mustn't so if you were to look at the surface, as we've confronted this particular crisis, we have a lot of success stories about how we took a contact-based educational program, and with very little warning, I think we've produced a really good quality online offering that we could sell it. I think we don't want to, and I'm speaking for my school, but I know every school. It's not just a St. Andrews thing. I know we've schools across the country have been innovative, and there's nothing like a crisis to really propel your thinking to create stuff. But my word, it does come at a cost. And I think, the holiday that the staff went through was not a holiday in any sense of what they would have as recuperative time. It was spent planning, preparing, and of course, undergoing enormous stress in their own personal capacity, in their own space. So the stress that staff have been under is enormous, and it's around personal life, it's around extended networks of family who've been affected either economically or in other ways. It's around their own job security, worries about sustainability of the schools and things. So having a set of mental tools that you can think back on that say, we know about learned helplessness, we know what it's about. Let's not fall into that sort of trap, and just let's go back and read that bit about growth through crisis, and I mean, I'm idealizing it. I know there's a lot of people taking a lot of strain, but the tools of positive psychology apply to ourselves in our own capacity, and they are as good a way to confront these sorts of challenges as any. I don't think there's a better way.
No, absolutely right. I mean, it's that idea of being metacognitive, isn't it? Yeah, kind of thinking about our thinking and catching our negative patterns, Barbara Fredrickson talks about the spirals, kind of catching ourselves if we get into that negative spiral of thought, and, positive psychology tools of that broaden and build, kind of identify what are the key positive emotions that can kind of switch you into the positive spiral. And of course that then, as you say, if you have these wellness tools, you're able to maybe catch yourself a little bit more and keep yourself on a balance for longer, despite how difficult these times are. But you need to be practiced in them and have been exposed to them, don't you?
Very much so. Yeah.
Alan, talking about exposure, I suppose, as someone, and you've now, as a school, have hosted 2 positive education conferences in South Africa. I was lucky enough to speak at the one last year, and it was fantastic having speakers from around the world. And I know that you were in the process of getting the 3rd one up and running, and I know there was some exciting, there were some guests who were going to really, be real draw cards, I suppose, in terms of the positive education movement. And of course, now with COVID, you've had to change that. And I'm pleased that you mentioned that it could well be a virtual conference, because it would be a shame if it didn't. But tell us about, first of all, I'd love you to just talk about, quickly about the first 2 conferences, points that really struck you and that came out of those. And then tell us a little bit about the upcoming one, and also around how, because you mentioned earlier about formalizing this movement. What are your thoughts around that?
Okay, so I mean, the first conference, our objective there was really just to test the water, to get the basic principles out there in an environment where there were very varied sort of layers of engagement, and that worked well. We had Simon Murray out, and it achieved its objective. There was a lot of enthusiasm and a really good turnout. The next year we had Matthew White, and again a good turnout, and the objective there was to assume that we weren't all beginners now, and there was a growing body of interest and knowledge, and so it really just took the conversation to a different sort of level. I think now it's a well-known field. There are a lot of schools doing it. My dream, sometimes, I don't know, as sort of schools, you want to have the best rugby team. It's like this Cold War that you want to be the best. My dream for this is that it's a completely, almost like open source arrangement, that we don't score brownie points off each other by being the best or the greatest, that we are able to create a collaborative sort of environment. And so to do that, we need to formalize a body that will be formally constituted and internationally affiliated with the international bodies. There are probably 2 that we're working with. And oddly, I love a in the flesh sort of contact conference. There's networking and interaction and stuff that you can do there that you simply can't replicate on a Zoom. But what you get from a Zoom that you can't get from that is access to people much more easily. We were going to, the logistics of getting somebody who works like Anthony Selden out for a conference is huge, and the cost enormous. But to get Anthony Selden to do a few sessions on a Zoom, or we also talked to Anne Robinson from Ravenswood in Australia, and from Australia it's a big mission to get here, but to run a few sessions on Zoom, it's not the same. But from that end, it's much easier to get the best thinkers into the room at the same time.
And on on the flip side of that as well, Alan, I imagine there are folk who probably wouldn't have been able to access the conference because of cost and timing as delegates, who now will have the opportunity to as well. So it works well both ways, doesn't it?
Very much so. So, and what we're going to do there is convene a formal sort of business meeting to constitute a committee to take it forward, and to so that the conference itself can begin rotating from centre to centre, so that We all get our fair share of having to travel and not travel.
Yeah.
And so I think I think the international developments are very exciting. I think there's lots to talk about. I think the national interest, it's not now, I mean, there is a bit of hunkering down that we need to do post-COVID, in the sense that maybe we don't all have the budgets to get international guests and things. And so online suits all of that for this particular time and space that we're in.
Great.
And so I see this as quite an exciting unintended consequence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it could be wonderful. And I love the idea of getting the schools together and actually, formalizing this whole thing so that it is, and the fact that to get schools to share and to learn from you, there's so much wisdom out there that we're probably not tapping into yet. And it's going to be wonderful to have people having the conversation, isn't it? And for what is a very good, it's a fantastic cause. I mean, I suppose the two of us, we're quite biased, aren't we? We very passionate about this field, but I really think in the end, and I know you and I have had this conversation before, what we do is actually about the kids. And if we're giving them access to these skills at a much younger age than we ever had the opportunity of getting access to them, it's of course going to be positive as well, isn't it? I mean, it really is putting, the kind of idea of holistic education. This is adding a different dimension.
Yeah, and I am at heart, all the other stuff that I do, I love my moments when I'm teaching in a classroom, and when you are able to develop young minds in a way that gives them the space and the tools to flourish. Doesn't matter that I'm teaching chemistry. It's what actually gives you the sense that you're doing much more, not just chemistry. I love chemistry. It's a great subject to teach. But in a sense, if you're teaching boys to flourish in a classroom environment, they do better in your subject.
Absolutely.
The plain mercenary truth is that when children are flourishing, they do better. Why wouldn't we do it?
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, my research, my master's thesis was in self-efficacy, and it literally, I did it in self-efficacy because it was, how do we get young people to believe in themselves, to believe they can, and hence my passion of, in positive education and positive psychology is because, I firmly believe that by giving them these tools, we enable them to flourish, and why wouldn't we? Absolutely right. Alan, I think one of the things I'd love and if you're happy, and what we'll do is we'll put some resources together, at least some contact details and things together, and we'll pop them on below this podcast for anyone who's listening. Please just go onto the details below. You'll see in there. We'll make sure that you have access to information. If you're interested, if you're involved in school and you're interested in coming to the conference, then we'll have you on our list, and then we'll make sure that Craig, in his capacity as heading up the wellness side at St Andrews, can get people involved and make sure that they hear when and how things are going to be happening. Would that be good with you, Alan?
Absolutely, I would welcome that.
Brilliant. So, Alan, I think we'll call it a day there, but I just want to say a massive thank you. It's always, it's inspiring, and hence why I wanted you to come and speak on our podcast, because, it's inspiring listening to you as someone who is passionate about positive education, but even in a greater sense is passionate about education and about the whole idea of growing young people and making sure that they flourish. And quite rightly, when the fact that you're saying, if my teachers are flourishing, my students are going to flourish. And I think that it really has been wonderful to have you here. I love these conversations when we have them, not just here on the podcast, but normally, when we connect. And so thank you so much for taking up the time. I know it's really busy now with schools kind of lined up to start going back. So I know how valuable your time is. So we really, really appreciate it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for having me. It's been lovely.
Brilliant. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been very, very privileged to have Alan Thompson from St Andrews College here speaking to us on In Conversations With. Please make sure that you do check out the details, and most of all, stay safe.